Unfortunately, to be black in a racialized world, in the world that we live in today, is to have a history of trauma.
With regards to the Black Muslim narrative in Islamic spaces, do you feel that it's something that's under-discussed?
When you say Black Muslim narrative, we have to put it in a context of we're speaking in more of a contemporary Western context, right? Because if you were to go to Mali or Sudan or Somalia or anywhere in Africa or even in the Middle East, this concept of Black Muslim isn't really a concept because it's normal, right? There's no differentiation amongst the Muslims, at least in Africa and in Arabia, in terms of black and non-black. That's also like more of a recent thing. So when we're speaking about the Black Muslim narrative, I guess first we have to put it in a context of where and when, because we know like Timbuktu in Mali was a center for Islamic learning for Muslims all over the world, and people from Arabia, Asia, what have you, would go there and study. If we're speaking about the importance or the contributions of Black Muslims, and that term in itself, Black Muslim, was coined, I guess, by American journalists who were actually speaking on them being different to other Muslims, and how they are different. So even the term, I guess, Black Muslim in itself is a new term that we have, I guess, embraced, and we should embrace. I've been looking at how Black Muslims in America, well, at least recently, mainly that's what I've been looking at, how they did a lot of the legwork, and they did a lot of the fighting and sacrificing for Muslims as an entire group to be afforded the same rights and to be recognized as a religion in the same way that Catholics and Jews were recognized as a religion within the prisons. So that means having the ability to hold Jummah prayers, ability to go to khutbahs, pray in congregation, X, Y, and Z, and also access religious material. Muslims in general were not afforded these same rights. So the Black Muslims and the Nation of Islam were sort of pivotal in like at the center of fighting for those rights and being sent to solitary confinement in huge numbers, going to court, bringing legal proceedings forward in order to gain those rights. And then once those rights were gained, and once those rights were achieved, it seems like the rest of the Muslim community, at least in America, had then sort of turned their backs on Black Muslims and forgotten what their contributions were.
In terms of coinage and the name Black Muslim, yes, I mean it's definitely popularized, during the Nation of Islam, but the meaning behind it in terms of having a unique culture, unique history, unique challenges, that is a distinction, and it's not monolithic by any by any means. It's diverse within itself. The point here is that there is a distinct identity within the Muslim community here in the U.S. As you can see with Brother Hashim, you have Shia, you have Sunni. And it can range all the way from, the Nation of Islam or what have you, all the way to, I guess what you will call Salafi or revivalist movements. But what they all do have in common is the struggle of not only just, what all Muslims have to work with and deal with regard to religious struggles, but also the racial really caste system that was established. All these different expressions of our Islam is kind of, that's in the backdrop. The racialization and how we're treated as people of color is always something that we have to keep in mind as we're trying to express ourselves, or as we're trying to liberate ourselves from whatever different social struggles that really sometimes have nothing to do with our Islam. Actually, Islam, for us in America especially, was used to liberate us from the racial and social struggles. The idea of even calling ourselves Black Muslim or adopting, even if others might have, possibly imposed that, or some of us might feel that was imposed on us, but even that categorization was somewhat liberating for a lot of people during those time periods. The relationship that Black Americans have with Islam is a lot different than a lot of other Muslim groups, in the sense that Islam has been used to liberate us socially from the confines of our oppression here in America.
There's very much this feeling that the closer you are to whiteness, the more opportunities you have to take advantage of the privileges of whiteness. And as you know, a lot of the immigrant communities in the UK and in the States, that proximity is there to varying degrees. And so I think what we see is an aspirational immigrant class of people who have an opportunity to get in, you know, to assimilate and to get in and to take advantage of the privilege, which is something that Black people have never had, right? And I think this probably goes in the States, in the UK, in the diaspora in general. So one of the things I feel that we have benefited from is an outsider's perspective on the society. It's almost and again, of course, this is not to discount the Black middle class, of course, but I feel like from what we see in the UK, maybe it's in the States as well, the Black Muslim population, even if they are economically aspirational, because of their Blackness and the Black experience, there is more of a critical approach, a critical attitude towards power, towards privilege, towards stuff that's going on, which I think, dominant Muslim cultures or, Asian, Arab, etc. Muslim cultures, they're not about that life. Like they want to assimilate, they want to get, the benefits of the society. And I think if you have, for generations, have worked and worked and worked and followed the rules and broken the rules and followed the rules, and you still can't get a break, I think something happens there where you start to think, you know what, maybe this system isn't actually worth assimilating into. Maybe this whole thing isn't actually worth, me selling myself and selling my soul, etc., to get a piece of. And so the theme of resistance and resilience is something that we have, as speakers, as panelists, we have heard it coming up again and again and again. And a lot of people kind of want to put Black Muslims in a box as this despised group, as the ones that everyone ignores and they don't ever get any representation, etc. And while that may be true, the flip side of that is that we have a view on the community, a view on the society that allows us to critique it and that allows us to really to push for change and to fight for change and to call for change and to make up noise, in ways that is actually, it has the potential to transform our communities, our society, and rebuild things. And I feel like that aspect of being a Black Muslim, if you want to call it that, I feel we can claim and reclaim what being Black as a Muslim has made us, and not allow the dominant cultures. Certainly in the UK, we are a minority, and the dominant culture is Asian culture, and not allow their attitudes, their values, their prejudices, their stereotypes, and their low expectations of us to have any bearing on us and how we move.
I don't use the word Black except in a political concept. If someone asks me what nationality is, I would say I'm Moorish American, because I understand that being a Moorish American has its own connotations to the American, how America sees us as African captives. Think about this. Everybody in America but Native Americans are immigrants, except us. We're captives. We're the only people who are brought here unwilling to come here. So our dynamics is different than the Pakistani or the Iranians. So they've already, I don't know how it is, they've already come to America looking for the American dream. So their dynamic and their experience is totally different than our experience, right? And how we see Blackness is different, because we had in one of our cases, like, are we Blacks or are we Africans? You see what I'm saying, bro? And that was something we really debated about at UC Berkeley, because we understand Black as a political term when we're talking to them. But amongst ourselves, I see myself as a person of African descent, because it connects me to a land, not to a verb, to an adjective. Black is just an adjective that was used in the 60s. And so I think that for the Muslims, we have to make sure we understand how we use these words in connection to the audience that we're speaking to, because we can mislead people. So one of my biggest pet peeves is when they say, who are the Blacks around Prophet Muhammad? That's the No, part. That's the dumbest thing in the world, because everybody around Prophet Muhammad be considered black in America. You know what I'm saying? Whether you are light skinned or dark skinned, you're considered black if you got one drop. But sometimes we get in this thing, well, Bilal is the only black person around Prophet Muhammad. That is so silly. Prophet Muhammad is considered black. All the Arabs considered black. And they know that. But we start to use these words in order to identify, to make, we're still trying to appease the person that we're debating against in our language.
Hafsa, after Hashim has kind of deconstructed all of the language around Black Muslim and what these things mean, the question, I guess, is a bit more open-ended from my side in terms of, you know, how do you identify and what does the identity mean to you specifically?
I think the identity is constantly changing. I don't think it's like a thing that's sort of written down in stone. I think it's very sort of, for me, especially on my journey from probably about 10 years ago to now, what I'd class myself as, the sort of descriptions I give to myself kind of constantly change. But I think when it comes to blackness, obviously I'm Nigerian, and so I really sort of identify with my culture on that side. And when it comes to Islam, the way that I sort of abide by the religion is from, you know, my heritage, from my culture in West Africa, in Nigeria specifically. The dominant madhab is the Maliki madhab, so I'm very much sort of on that path with, you know, Sufi aspects that are just not even from like the sort of the trends and traditions that we see sort of developing in the young community now, but more of like, what did my grandparents do and what is my grandma telling me, what are my parents telling me. That's how I sort of learn about my faith and continue to sort of develop upon it from that foundation. And I think it's been a very difficult journey for that reason, because of how within sort of predominantly Asian and Arab Muslim spaces in the UK, that sort of idea of the Maliki madhab is like literally just shunned, and like the idea of Sufism is just shunned. And I wouldn't call myself a Sufi just because I don't feel like titles are, you can't call yourself a Sufi. It's like it's a practice. It's an you know, it's a lifestyle. Exactly. For me, it was the conflict of walking into spaces and being questioned about how I was living my life, and people calling me non-Muslim for the way that I was practicing my Islam. And for me, that was very conflicting to come, even from like people of knowledge. I had shuyukh, I had sheikhs and people who were teaching me, who were from different madhabs and would be telling me what I'm doing is completely out of the fold of the religion, and not realizing that that was coming from a place of bias and lack of understanding, and passing that on to young people like myself. And so growing up in that space, those sort of spaces for me was very transformative, in the sense that I was on the sort of edge of losing myself and not understanding how my faith and my culture was supposed to align, and instead was sort of catapulted into this world of, actually, you know what? I found these spaces quite toxic. I've got to now create spaces where people like me, people who have the same madhabs, can go to people of knowledge and who can sort of be inspired and just sort of find a way to balance all of these things in our lives. Obviously, we'll never find a perfect balance, but to go hand in hand with culture and faith. And I think obviously that's quite different to sort of things over on the other side, because the sort of idea of being a Black Muslim is much more interconnected, I think, on that side of things. But I think with the disconnect from our culture that I experience as sort of second generation, it's been quite difficult to find a place that works for me.
Historically, what's it been like from a sort of identity perspective? Have you felt the need to conceal or hide away from the sort of Black Muslim identity, or what's it been like? Just yeah.
I'm a convert, I'm a revert. So I actually had a lot of conflict with accepting Islam on the basis of my Pan-Africanism. I went to Egypt. I was intrigued by the hijab. I was intrigued by Islam. But I'm like, I'm an African. I'm Black. I can't be an Arab or an Asian. I don't want to leave my identity in exchange for this religion. And I'm very grateful to my friend who said to me, but you do know that there are Africans who are Muslim, right? And I was like, that's true. So alhamdulillah, I talk about this from my sister's lips, because I went on this journey of discovery to Guinea and Senegal. And of course, if anyone's been to West Africa and you've seen the way that Muslims are in West Africa, or wherever you go in Africa, actually, it's just a part of them. There was no conflict. There was nothing that I could see that made me question, can I be both? So that's, alhamdulillah, how I was able to become Muslim. For us in the 90s, we came into Islam Many of us were converts, reverts, and we came into Islam and we came into Salafiyah. And the Salafi experience in the UK, I think, is quite different, or maybe the same as the States. But we came into Islam and we were told that your religion is the most important thing. Your race means nothing. It doesn't matter that you're black or anything else. All of that is jahiliyyah, and basically get rid of it. So you will find that for many, many years, people who became Muslim or started practicing in the 90s, they were not on blackness like that, especially not politically, because it was felt that your Muslim identity or Islamic identity, that is the only thing that matters. And anything else, that's your weakness, that's jahiliyyah, that's just, it's not from Islam. And it's only now, and I'm seeing this in my peers, only now that you're seeing people who at the time were black, whatever, I'm Muslim, I'm on Quran and Sunnah, etc., who are now reclaiming not just their black culture, not just their black identity, but also what blackness means in a racialized society in terms of your politics, in terms of your critique of the society. And so I'm seeing that with my generation, this renaissance happening where a lot of my peers are proudly stepping into that black Muslim, proudly black, proudly Muslim, and there's no conflict there. But again, we didn't learn all the ways in which Africans were tied to Islam right from the beginning, right from the year of the Prophet ﷺ's birth. And I remember Sheikh Abdullah Hakim, quickly, if I can just mention this, he told the story of Abraha, who came with the elephants, right? We all know the year of the elephant. The Prophet ﷺ was born, and there's this huge army coming, okay? Which the Meccans are fleeing from this army, right? So much so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to send the birds with the stones, and we all know the story from the Quran. And Sheikh Abdullah said that Abraha, King Abraha, he was from Abyssinia. That was an African king who was coming to fight the Meccans at the time, the Quraysh, right? And we never think of it like that. Just like when Muslims think of, the Islamic past, the only black person they can think of is Bilal. But right from the Prophet ﷺ's birth, there was Abraha, then there's his foster mother, who was a woman of African descent, who was like his second mother. And again and again and again, you start to see that actually Africans have always been there. And Africans have always been implementing the deen, have been instrumental in the deen, have been the supporters of the deen, Najashi, so many, it doesn't even make sense to start naming them. But it's like that history has been erased, and we're only left with Bilal. And I want to see that that needs to be addressed for everyone, not just for people of African descent, but for all Muslims. Because I think that erasure of blackness from Islam is a part of the racism that our brothers and sisters, our co-religionists have imbibed through whatever the caste system, through colonialism, through whatever it is. And I personally want to see that imbalance. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be redressed.
I want to actually pick up on something you just mentioned and put the question to our two Atlantic brothers. What was the African-American experience like in the 90s with regards to the clash, or how, not the clash necessarily, but how culture and religion go hand in hand?
There was a tangible, as the sister had mentioned, there was a tangible sense of that kind of Salafi vibe, at least on the East, especially on the East Coast. And that's a whole nother thing, difference between the East Coast, West Coast. But definitely on the East Coast, the Salafi movement was very strong, and it pretty much, there was a, even if, whether you were Salafi or not, there was a tension in terms of being able to justify mainstream black culture within the black Muslim community. So on one hand, you had, the War of Deen community, who had always been like a progressive community, but also a very old, older community as well. So the type of black culture that they were, really more attuned with was more from like the 70s and the 60s, and the music and the dancing and all these type of things, where it had that kind of flavor to it, versus more of the hip hop culture of the 90s. But that said, you had from that side to, the Salafis was like, oh, that's haram. And, it's all jahiliyyah. But what you would find is in every major Muslim or every major city, especially where there were majority Black Muslims, like, Philadelphia or Atlanta, you would find, that range. You had your Wafdeen masjids, and they were big masjids, and you had your, proliferation of Salafi masjids, and you had the all what was in between. And so, our masjid was more kind of in between. We had embraced, tasawwuf, madhahib. People had studied overseas in places like Syria and Egypt and Morocco. I myself went to Morocco. I went to Syria. I went to Yemen. And I went to Egypt. But there was just more, diverse opinions within our community, considering that we had, we were working from madhahib more on principles than on actual individual issues. So they weren't like linchpin issues or like litmus tests. Do you listen to music? Do you're a good Muslim or a bad Muslim? It wasn't like that kind of thing. Everybody had their flavor. We had some people who were from the Wafdeen community. We had some people who were Salafi oriented. We had some people who were people of Tasawwuf. And generally in the Black community, you'll find some level of mixture there. But it was still a sense of Islam is going to save us from the vices of what was introduced into our culture, even if it wasn't something that we ourselves, like the whole crack epidemic and all the crime in the neighborhood. Islam was supposed to come and save us from that. Even today, when we started the masjid in Memphis, people in the neighborhood were like, "What are y'all going to do about these drug dealers?" Right? It's just understood in the culture that Black Muslims, specifically Black Muslims, for Turkish Muslims walking down the street, which we do have Turkish Muslims in our community, they won't ask them that question, right? And so it's not just about, unfortunately, in this case, it's not just about him being Muslim. It's about, oh, you're a Black Muslim, so you should know what to do here in this situation, which makes sense. I mean, because you're supposed to be part of that culture.
Hashim, I'm going to ask you a big question, but ask you to do it very briefly somehow.
Okay.
Imam Hamza just now spoke about culture, and he mentioned music. And just before we started recording, we were discussing very briefly music and hip hop specifically. And you said something I thought which was quite interesting off air. You were talking about the fact that if there's music that mentions Christ or Jesus, it's Christian music. You have the same with other religions and whatever else. But you said if you have mentions of Allah, it's hip hop. I guess just some thoughts from yourself about the meeting ground between Islam and hip hop and the influence that it's had, I guess, both ways.
It's important to understand that he's made point. There's a difference between the time frame in East Coast and West Coast, right? And I was a convert in the late 80s. And by being a convert, my experience is different, not just being a convert, but in that time frame, hip hop music was already the word Allah. Like the first time I heard the word Allah was like in a rap song. Rakim said, all praise belongs to Allah, and that's a blessing, right? The first time I saw Quran was Rakim's video when he got the Quran coming down, which for some people, this is blasphemy. But for us, it's like, yo, and it was Islam that had principles to it. And so, like your brother said, I was raised in a mosque. Some of you guys know Imam Abdul Ali Musa, right? And in California, our experience was, I didn't know what a Salafi was, right? Because the mosque I went to was African-American, but it was Shia, Sunni. It didn't make a difference what your madhahib was, as long as you want to put in work on the streets. And so I was raised with everybody like, look, man, that Shia, Sunni stuff, we put it to the side. So I remember when I went to Juma at UC Berkeley, there was 2 Jumas on the 4th and 5th floor. I didn't know where to go. I just took Shahada. I said, well, who's on the 4th floor? It was the Salafis. And this is what they said. They said, them people support Saudi Arabia. They said the 5th floor support Iran. I said, which one's revolutionary? They said the 5th floor. I went to the 5th floor. Now, the funny thing about it was the 5th floor was mainly all Sunnis. It wasn't a Shia Juma. It was Sunnis who supported the revolution. And so sometimes people get this madhahib thing mixed, but when I came into the room, Dr. Hamid Al-Gar, Imam Musa, Muhammad Al-Asi, all these people, they're all Sunnis. But they supported activism, you know what I'm saying, whether it was Sunni or Shia.
One of the things that we know, and I believe very strongly, while Africa is disrespected in the world, the descendants of Africa and Africa's children will never be at peace. That's what I believe. That's my personal belief. I believe that the communities, the societies that we live in the West were never made for us. I actually personally believe that they are toxic soil. I believe that they're poisoned. And the healing has to come from us reclaiming who we are as Africans. That's my personal belief. And for that to happen, we have to talk. We have to learn from each other on that basis of mutual respect, mutual acceptance, mutual healing, making space for and holding space for each other. Because that's one thing I'll tell you, when we have these conversations, it doesn't matter whether it's about Black love, which we talked about family, we talked about history, identity. There's one thing that keeps coming up again and again in almost every session, and that is trauma. And unfortunately, to be Black in a racialized world, in the world that we live in today, is to have a history of trauma. When the trauma is not acknowledged and nothing is done about it, then there can be no healing, right? So whether it's the trauma of having to leave your home and bring your children up in England, divorced from their culture, whether it's the trauma of not knowing who your people are, not knowing your real name, not knowing your language, whether it's the trauma of leaving your house and on a daily basis being afraid for your life, that is trauma that needs collective healing. It's collective trauma. That's what I believe, and I see it. But for me, the key is the next generation. What are we going to teach them? How are we going to bring them up to truly love who they are as children of African descent, wherever they are in the world, and as Muslims blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with Iman?
I think we are being empowered in the sense that we now understand, or we understand that it's not our responsibility to educate others on their anti-Blackness. For people who have embedded or programmed anti-Blackness within them, for them to accept that people that they see as below them have actually contributed to Islam and actually were the reason why they have a lot of their freedoms and have a lot of their beliefs and are able to access a lot of the books and the education that they do, is very difficult for them to accept. And for many years, for a long time, I guess, Black Muslims have been sort of fighting a losing battle in trying to prove that they should be accepted within the Muslim community, that we should be given the same rights and be given the same, respect as other Muslims. But overall, once you try that 5 times, 10 times, you've tried that for 20 years, you realize that actually you're not getting anywhere and you haven't really progressed in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years, except by actually taking that by force and going back within your own community and educating yourself and empowering yourself, and first growing from within your community.
Your personal identity and specific to your race and how you feel that that sort of connection to your race has deepened your relationship with Islam and vice versa. Like, is there a connection for you, and how is that manifested?
I definitely identify as, what we would normally call African American or Black American, Muslim, or that's what is commonly known as. But really, I think that's somewhat misleading because it tends to give an impression that something about Blackness itself, or it has some kind of essential quality to it in terms of how you would behave or what have you. Rather, it's more the experience of being the descendant of an enslaved African that is now, has been reintroduced to Islam, after it being taken away. Sometimes we're somewhat apprehensive about acknowledging race or things like that. No, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was clear about his tribal lineage, his tribal affiliations, as well as all the Sahaba and the Abyssinians and what have you. So that's built into our understanding of tradition. But what we could use it for is understanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as his family and his companions. We can gain from our experiences. We can identify and solve the problems or bring solutions to the table based off of the experiences that we share with the experiences that they had. And not all of us share the same experiences due to the fact that we come from different races. And وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that is one of his signs is the differences between our tongues, between the way we speak and our color. That's a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes I halfway joke with some of my students. Once I mentioned that ayah, I was like, would you say Ebonics is a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Based on that ayah. I mean, it's one of the tongues of the human being. But what out there, that was a little tongue in cheek, but the reality is that every human being has certain experiences that or the tribes and the races and the nations of humanity have experiences that can be expressed in a unique way that other people can't express it. I think this is what hip hop has been able to do very eloquently, and that's why everyone can identify with it, because everyone's been touched with some level of colonialism and racism, and they can't express it in the way that hip hop has been able to express it from the deep understanding that we have as descendants of enslaved Africans in America who are now Muslim and have been touched with Islam in a way that other parts of the Western Hemisphere has, other people in the African diaspora haven't been touched, in that way, or haven't, experienced Islam in the way that we've been able to experience. So that's the unique thing that I think we're able to bring. So when we come to our neighborhoods, we're bringing knowledge of the unseen, through our religion, and able to tie that and give meaning to our experience in a way that's much more meaningful than any other people are able to do, are able to express. And I think when we give dawah in that way, people are able to realize, all this that I've gone through has a meaning that transcends, this temporal reality, and it actually gives me a certain level of insight into my relationship with my Lord that I probably wouldn't be able to get in this way if I had gone through a different experience.
The final question I have, I'm just going to leave it open-ended, and whoever wants to jump in with an answer, feel free. But that question is, what can other ethnic and cultural Muslim groups learn from the Black Muslim community?
I just want to say, very simply, we don't. The Black Muslim community is lit. Like that's come and experience the energy, listen to the incredible conversations, the honesty, the humor, the energy. I think that there's so much that other people can learn, but also enjoy. Just have that experience of being in a space where you're open to listening and to learning. It's a very, very humbling thing, but it's also a privilege to be able to do that, to actually have access to people who are different from you and be allowed to see them in their natural habitat, being themselves. The more people venture out of their comfort zone and into those spaces, I think the more transformations we'll have, inshallah.
The two things I would say that they can learn, that they can take consideration. One, I say this as a follower, I don't consider myself Shia, but I follow the Ahlul Bayt, right? Is that whether people believe they were imams of Ahlul Bayt or not, from Imam Jafar Sadiq to Imam Mahdi, everybody who says they're Shia, don't I realize their mothers were Black Nubians? And so every imam from Jafar Sadiq to Imam Mahdi are Black and African. So I'm amazed that Shias are like, dude, how can you have anything negative Black when your imams are Black? One. Two, for the whole Ummah, Ali Shariati said this beautifully in his book Hajj. He said 5 times a day you bow down not just toward the Kaaba, but to an African woman who's buried next to the Kaaba. Maybe if they just at least learn who Hajar is and where she's from, then that inshallah could transform them and it makes a lot.
What was mentioned, I guess, like throughout the conversation a couple of times by Sister Naima, by Brother Hashim, is a spirit of resistance that you find within Black Muslims that you don't find within Asian Muslims and Arab Muslims. And I guess each community is responsible for their own empowerment. But if I was to speak on what other communities can learn from the Black Muslim community, is to not have this, as Sister Naima mentioned, like this desire that never ends to assimilate and to be accepted within like the Western white society, and to not be seen as different in any way, because whether you are Black, brown, white, anywhere that is outside of Europe, you will never be seen as equal, in my opinion, amongst the general white population. And in the West, And I think, as the sister mentioned, Black people, Black Muslims, Black people as a whole have accepted that in the majority, but I think amongst other communities, there's still a lot of there's still a lack of acceptance, and what that has led to is a lot of people sort of stepping on each other in order to climb this ladder, and a complete lack of, I guess, empowerment from that perspective.